to try to satisfy an insatiable appetite for weapons to fight the Germans. The war memorial, which dominates the public park, is a poignant and permanent reminder to the men who never came back. It was an emotional day on the 11th of November 1921 when the memorial was first unveiled. Although the Second World War brought big orders for Vickers, it also brought terrible hardship and death for many people in the town. Ominous war clouds had been gathering for some time. When the pride of Germany, the huge airship Hindenburg, passed over Barrow in 1936, it was the largest flying craft in the world. Although it was designed for passenger services, many believed its flight over the town had sinister implications, as they thought it took an unhealthy interest in the shipyards. Barrow eventually became part of the front line, as it suffered during the Blitz. The town was seen as a primary target, especially with the shipyards. Their importance was underlined in February 1940 when Winston Churchill, who was then First Lord of the Admiralty, came to the town with his wife to launch the aircraft carrier Indomitable. Just 3 months later, the King and Queen paid an official visit. In the summer of 1940, the threat of invasion was very real indeed. Even on the west coast, the possibility was taken seriously, and it certainly wasn't something that the Germans had ruled out at one time, as these rarely seen invasion maps of the area prove. These would have been vital to enemy troops if they had landed. Parts of the coastline at Walney were fenced off. Trenches were dug, and Bigger Bank, which had been a favourite recreational area for decades, now became a possible front line to be used to repel German invaders.
The threat of invasion of this country was very real, but I don't think it would ever have been envisioned that it would take place on this particular coast. However, we had to take precautions, and therefore all the beaches were mined. There was lots of barbed wire along there, there were gun emplacements everywhere, and in fact a lot of posts had to be driven into the sands so that gliders couldn't land there. So although it was low-key, I think there was plenty of precautions taken.
The likelihood of air attack increased during the autumn of 1940. The aerial bombardment seemed to take a long time to come, but when it did, it was short and devastating. The first bombs, over 300 incendiaries, were dropped on the Salt House area on the night of September the 12th. Luckily, many failed to go off and were taken away the next day, but a 5-year-old boy died of burns. He was the first of many victims. The people of Barrow had to wait another 7 months before the full onslaught of the Luftwaffe. 40 people were killed in April 1941 in the Vernon Street and Union Street areas. Some homes were totally demolished, and a direct hit on the Trevelyan Hotel killed 5 guests. Some of the homes worst affected were in Vernon Street. At number 40, a grandmother, husband and wife, and 5-year-old daughter all died, while next door a husband, wife and son were victims. The area, which is now the Coronation Gardens, was hit by a landmine which fell on the Abbey Road Baptist Church, killing 2 fire watchers. About 17 people died in Union Street. Derek Lyon was just 9 years old when Barrow was bombed. From a youngster's perspective, the war years were often filled with adventure and excitement.
During the war, I was a boy at school in the Hindpool area of Barrow, and we had the joy of our school being bombed, which meant that we had 6 weeks off school. So Hitler wasn't such a bad chap after all, we thought at that time. But in fact, our house and shop where we lived was badly damaged, and we couldn't live there, and we went to live in the country at Martin, just outside Barrow. So it was an interesting time for a boy. The main thing was that if the all clear didn't go until midnight, well, then you didn't have to go to school till 10 o'clock in the morning, and you could use that extra time to look for shrapnel and souvenirs.
The raiders kept on returning, and the death toll and destruction increased rapidly. From the 3rd to the 10th of May, there was a sustained and nightly bombardment. Over 40 more people were killed, and hundreds were injured. Many houses were flattened or were so badly affected that they had to be demolished, and another 1,400 others were severely damaged, but were eventually repaired. Bombs fell in many areas. There were lots of harrowing stories. And for a time there were so many killed that there was a shortage of gravediggers to keep up with demand. One warden returned home to find his wife dead in the ruins of their home, but he went on digging other people from the rubble. Sometimes 1 or 2 houses were demolished. Sometimes it was most of a street. 20 houses in Howe Street were levelled, over 30 in Exmouth Street, and over 40 in Holker Street. Despite the destruction, air raid precautions prevented many more deaths. Today you can see in some areas the sites of wartime bombing, where modern homes have been built next to Victorian buildings that escaped the worst of the damage. There was also a problem each night, as there was a huge exodus of people trying to get away from the most dangerous areas. Some decided it was safer to go into the countryside, at places like Sowerby Woods, or sleep rough in barns, or even in the fields, rather than risk death from the German bombs. Many went to stay with friends in nearby towns and villages. Others were evacuated even further afield. Most received a warm welcome. Others were not happy and wanted to go home in spite of the danger. The evacuation was codenamed Pied Piper, and as the youngsters arrived, they had labels around their necks and gas mask holders hanging from their shoulders. The Blitz had a terrible effect on Barrow. Apart from around 100 deaths, over 500 were injured. About 600 houses were destroyed, and over 10,500 damaged out of a total stock of 18,000. It was ironic that the residential areas had suffered most because the real targets were the giant Vickers shipyards and the steelworks. It's said that on a moonlit night, heavy rain made Abbey Road look like the docks from the air. The shipyards suffered only 4 direct hits, and fortunately none of the 36 vessels under construction at the time suffered serious damage. But the effect of the bombs on some parts of the yard was considerable. These rarely seen pictures show one of the huge cranes that came crashing down, leaving a tangled mass of metal. Elsewhere, buildings were wrecked and hundreds of windows blown out. Thousands of people were expected to raise money for the war effort. Everyone was encouraged to form savings groups. In Barrow, the National Savings Drive and Wings for Victory Week raised almost £700,000, enough for 12 Lancaster bombers and 42 Spitfires. There were many special savings weeks: War Weapons Week, Warship Week, Wings for Victory Week, and Salute the Soldier Week. One of the biggest drives was for scrap metal. After the First World War, many of the early tanks were displayed in public areas. There was a tank and field guns on show at Walney in the 1920s. After the Great War, they were a constant reminder to people about the horrors of the trenches. Little did they know that this metal would be taken away to be used as part of their next war effort. Pots and pans were all handed over to be melted down, and miles of Victorian railings were ripped down from outside homes, public buildings and parks. The stumps are a reminder of the early patriotic fervour, although the railings were never used as they were made of cast iron. The war produced many unusual stories, and the story of U-boat number 570 is one of the strangest. The U-boats and their crews were the pride of the German Navy, but on April the 27th, 1941, U-570 was captured on its maiden voyage 80 miles south of Iceland. It was brought to Barrow where tests and trials were carried out. The authorities were impressed by many advanced designs. The U-boats had welded hulls which made them lighter and capable of diving to greater depths. After some modifications, the U-570 was renamed HMS Graf and was returned to service, but this time against the Germans.